There's a photograph I want you to imagine. It's July 22nd, 1988. Evening is falling over Manhattan. The sun is turning the city orange and gold. It's the kind of beautiful summer evening when New York feels almost peaceful, when the chaos and noise of the daytime streets quiets down and the city becomes something elegant. Inside a 14th floor penthouse on East 64th Street, a woman named Gloria Vanderbilt is sitting in her living room. She's surrounded by art, paintings, sculptures, mementos from a life lived at the very center of American high society. The apartment is quiet. Her son is home. His name is Carter Vanderbilt Cooper. And in the next hour, Gloria's entire world will collapse. Not because of an accident, not because of illness, but because of a choice. A single moment that will define the rest of her life and the life of her surviving son, and that will ripple forward through decades, affecting everyone connected to this family. This is a story about what happens when you have everything and it's still not enough. It's about a family name that carries centuries of weight. It's about a mother's love that couldn't save her son. It's about a younger brother who spent 30 years trying to understand why. And it's about a question that has never been fully answered. Why did Carter Vanderbilt Cooper, a 2-3-year-old Princeton, graduate with every advantage, every opportunity, and every reason to live? Why did he let go? But to answer that question, we have to go back. Back before Carter was born. Back to where this story really begins. The Vanderbilt story doesn't begin with wealth. It begins with a man named Cornelius Vanderbilt, and it begins with nothing. Born in 1794 on Staten Island to a poor family, Cornelius Vanderbilt started working on ferries as a teenager. He wasn't born rich, he wasn't born connected. He was born poor, and he was determined to change that. The thing about Cornelius Vanderbilt is that he understood something fundamental about power and money. You don't just make money, you consolidate it. You take all the small operations and you merge them. You create monopolies. You eliminate competition. You become not just wealthy, but essential. He started with ferries on the Hudson River. By the time he was in his 20s, he owned his own ferry business. By his 30s, he'd expanded into steamships. He was buying up routes, consolidating operations, creating what was essentially a transportation monopoly on the East Coast. But Cornelius saw something coming. He saw that the future wasn't in water transportation. The future was railroads. So he pivoted. He became interested in railways. He began buying up rail lines. And over the course of decades, he created something extraordinary. The New York Central Railroad System, a network that connected New York City to the Great Lakes and beyond. A system that didn't just move goods, it moved the entire economy of the nation. By the time Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877, his fortune was estimated at over $100 million. In today's dollars, that's roughly $3 billion. He was one of the wealthiest men in American history, and he left that wealth to his family. But wealth like that doesn't just sit quietly. Wealth like that builds things. Monuments. The Vanderbilts built the Breakers, a 7-room Italian Renaissance palace in Newport, Rhode Island. Marble House, another Newport mansion with a gold ballroom. The Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina, 250 rooms, 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, 65 fireplaces. The largest privately owned home ever built in America. These weren't just homes. They were declarations. Declarations that the Vanderbilts had arrived, that they were the pinnacle of American society, that they belonged at the top. The Vanderbilt name became synonymous with American aristocracy. The family was everywhere. They collected art masterpieces. They endowed universities. They married into European nobility. They appeared in society pages. They hosted events that shaped culture. To be a Vanderbilt meant something. It opened doors. It granted access. It meant you belonged to an elite world that most people could never enter. But, and this is crucial for understanding Carter's story, it also meant something else. It meant expectations. It meant pressure. It meant that your entire identity was wrapped up in a name, in a legacy, in a history that predated you. By the time Carter Vanderbilt Cooper was born, the original Vanderbilt fortune had been diluted through generations, split among dozens of descendants, spent on estates and art and lavish lifestyles. It was still enormous, still generational wealth, still enough to provide every advantage. But the psychological weight of that name? That remained completely intact. To understand Carter, you have to understand his mother. Gloria Vanderbilt was born into the tail end of the Gilded Age. She was a Vanderbilt by birth and by marriage, but her childhood was anything but the fairy tale it appeared to be. Gloria's parents' marriage was a disaster. Her father, Hugh Auchincloss Jr., was a lawyer with connections but not much personality. Her mother was fascinated by society and appearances, but underneath the perfect exterior, the marriage was falling apart. When Gloria was very young, her parents began to argue. These weren't just disagreements. They were the kind of fights that children remember, the kind that echo through your entire life. Her parents eventually separated, and when she was 10 years old, Gloria's life became the subject of a national scandal, the custody battle that the newspapers called the Duel of the Heiresses. Her parents fought publicly over who would get to raise her. The newspapers covered it obsessively. Gloria's intimate life, her feelings, her preferences, her relationships with both parents was splashed across front pages. A 10-year-old girl became a public spectacle. The Duel of the Heiresses was one of the biggest celebrity news stories of the 1930s. Gloria Vanderbilt was a child, and the entire nation was discussing her family drama as if it were entertainment. She was shuffled between relatives. She was sent to boarding schools. She was raised by servants more often than by her parents. She was a valuable commodity, an heiress, but she wasn't really a daughter. She was a possession to be fought over. By the time Gloria was a teenager, she understood something fundamental about love. Love in her family was transactional. People didn't love you for who you were. They loved you for what you represented. Your value was determined by your family name, your wealth, your connections, your ability to marry well. This became the template for her entire life. Gloria spent her 20s reinventing herself. She became a fashion icon. She was beautiful, in a way that made photographers want to photograph her. She became an artist, creating collages and designs. She was intelligent and creative, and she used those gifts to build a public persona that was separate from just being the Vanderbilt heiress. But she was also troubled in ways that weren't visible in the photographs. She was searching for something: love, stability, real connection in a world where people only saw her as a symbol. She married 3 times before she met the man who would change everything. The first husband was Pat DiCicco, an entertainment executive. The marriage was essentially a business arrangement. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't loving either. He had his own life, his own interests. Gloria was beautiful and useful, but she wasn't the center of his world. The second husband was Leopold Stokowski, a renowned conductor. He was impressive and sophisticated, but he was also controlling and distant. He had his own artistic pursuits. Gloria, again, was secondary. And then she met Wyatt Cooper. Wyatt Emery Cooper was born in Quitman, Mississippi in 1927. His background couldn't have been more different from Gloria's. He came from a modest family. His father was a farmer. His mother was a teacher. There was no family fortune. There were no names that opened doors. But Wyatt had something that Gloria had never experienced: genuine warmth, genuine kindness, a real capacity for love. Wyatt was a writer and a screenwriter. He was intelligent and cultured, but he wasn't arrogant about it. He could talk to anyone, from any background, with real interest and respect. He had what's sometimes called emotional intelligence, the ability to read people, to understand them, to make them feel genuinely seen. When Gloria met Wyatt, something shifted. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't being valued for her name, or her beauty, or her wealth. She was being valued as a person, as a human being, as someone worthy of real love. They married in 1956, and Wyatt made a decision that would fundamentally shape his children's lives. He was going to be a real father, present, engaged, loving. Wyatt and Gloria had 2 children together. Their first child was born in 1950, a son they named Anderson, and their second child was born in 1965, another son named Carter. Wyatt was determined to give these boys something that neither he nor Gloria had experienced in their own childhoods: unconditional love, real attention, genuine parenting. He read to them constantly. He talked with them about ideas and history and philosophy. He took them to museums. He engaged them in conversations that treated them as intelligent people, not just children to be managed. He was present in a way that was almost revolutionary for fathers of that era, especially wealthy fathers. The family lived in a penthouse apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The apartment was filled with art and books and mementos from their travels. It was a home where intellectual curiosity was valued, where ideas mattered, where children were seen as people worth listening to. This was the world that Carter Vanderbilt Cooper was born into. Not just wealth, but genuine love. Not just privilege, but real attention. Not just a famous name, but a father who was actually present. By all accounts, Carter was an extraordinary child. He was brilliant from a young age, the kind of intelligence that teachers noticed immediately. But he was also something else, deeply feeling, empathetic, the kind of child who noticed when other people were sad, who asked questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand the world. Friends of the family remember young Carter as being unusually mature for his years, thoughtful, interested in history, interested in other people. He had his mother's artistic sensibility and his father's emotional warmth. He seemed in many ways like a child who was going to do great things, who was going to become someone important, someone who would make a genuine contribution to the world. Anderson, his younger brother, was more outgoing, more social, more comfortable in crowds. But Carter had something different. Carter had depth. On January 5th, 1978, when Carter was 13 years old, Wyatt Cooper entered New York Hospital for heart surgery. Wyatt was only 50 years old, but he had a family history of heart disease. His doctors had recommended the surgery. It was supposed to be routine. These procedures had been done thousands of times. Success rates were good. Everything pointed to this being a manageable medical intervention. Carter didn't understand at 13 that his father might not come home. He was old enough to understand that his father was having surgery. He was old enough to understand that surgery was serious, but he was still in that age where parents seem invincible, where you can't really imagine your life without them, where the possibility of permanent loss is too abstract to fully comprehend. The surgery went well initially. Wyatt went into the operating room. The doctors did what they were supposed to do. But then, during the procedure, Wyatt suffered a massive heart attack. His heart couldn't survive the stress of the surgery. Despite the doctor's best efforts, despite having one of the best surgical teams in New York, Wyatt died on the operating table. He died at 1 p.m. on January 6th, 1978. The doctors called Gloria and told her that her husband was dead, that he hadn't survived, that there was nothing they could do. Imagine that phone call. Imagine receiving a phone call that tells you that the person you love more than anyone in the world is simply gone. Imagine being told that in 24 hours everything has changed, that your husband is dead, that your children will grow up without a father, that the life you thought you were living is over. The funeral was held a few days later. Carter was 13, Anderson was 10. They were old enough to understand that something terrible had happened, but not fully old enough to understand the permanence of death, not fully old enough to understand that their father would never come home again, that every conversation they'd ever have with him had already happened, that there would be no more dinners where Wyatt asked them about their thoughts on history or philosophy, no more bedtime stories, no more moments of being seen and valued by their father. Those moments were over, forever. What happened to Carter after his father's death is crucial for understanding his later life, because losing a parent when you're 13 is different from losing a parent when you're younger. At 13, you're old enough to feel the full weight of the loss. You're old enough to understand what's been taken away. But you're also at an age where you're still figuring out who you are. Wyatt had been Carter's model for what a good man looked like. what emotional availability looked like, what unconditional love looked like. And then, suddenly, that model was gone. Friends who knew Carter said that he seemed to mature overnight, that something shifted in him. He became more serious, more introspective, more aware of fragility and impermanence. He also seemed to take on a kind of responsibility that no 13-year-old should have to carry. His mother was devastated. His younger brother was confused. And Carter seemed to feel obligated to be strong, to be mature, to help hold the family together. Gloria fell into a deep depression. The home that had been filled with Wyatt's presence, his books, his reading glasses, his warmth, now felt empty. Haunted, every room was a reminder of what had been lost. She had to function. She had to take care of her 2 boys. She had to maintain the apartment. She had to engage with the world. But internally, she was shattered. Years later, Gloria would write about this period. She would describe going through the motions of life while feeling like she was underwater, like she was watching herself from outside her body, doing the things that needed to be done, but not feeling anything. The emptiness was vast, and both Carter and Anderson felt that emptiness. They felt their mother's grief, they felt the absence of their father, and they felt something else. The understanding that people you love can be taken away. That death is real. That loss is permanent. The Cooper family had to figure out how to survive without Wyatt. Gloria, despite her grief, recognized that she needed to be present for her sons. She needed to create some kind of stability in a home that had been shattered. So she did what many grieving parents do, she continued. She maintained routines. She kept the apartment beautiful. She made sure the boys went to school, had meals, had what they needed. But the lightness was gone. The sense of play and possibility that Wyatt had brought to the home that was gone. Carter threw himself into school. Friends at his preparatory school noticed that he was unusually focused, unusually serious. He was an excellent student, brilliant, actually, but it seemed like he was using school as a refuge. Like he was escaping into intellectual pursuits because the emotional reality of his home life was too heavy. Anderson, on the other hand, became withdrawn. He later said that losing his father radically changed who he was. He became more introverted, more concerned with survival, less outgoing. The person he was before age 10, he said, was probably more interesting than the person he became after. Losing his father created a fear in him that persisted for decades. Carter went to Princeton University in 1983, following in the footsteps of countless American elites. Princeton wasn't just a school, it was a gateway, a place where future leaders and thinkers and power brokers were molded. And Carter thrived there academically. His professors recognized his intelligence immediately. He majored in history, which made sense given his intellectual curiosity about how the past shaped the present. He graduated with honors in 1987. But here's what's important. Even at Princeton, surrounded by other intelligent people, even with academic success, Carter seemed to carry something heavy. Friends from that time remember him as thoughtful, kind, genuinely interested in other people, but also as someone who seemed older than his years, someone who carried weight. He was 23 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. He had accomplished everything that people from his background were supposed to accomplish, but something inside him seemed fragile. Somehow, despite all the advantages, despite the brilliance, something was broken. After Princeton, Carter moved into publishing. He worked for American Heritage magazine, which was exactly the kind of place that would have suited his interests. He was working with history, with ideas, with intellectual content. His colleagues remember him as intelligent and dedicated and easy to work with. He also spent time in Washington, working for a political journal. He was building a career in the world of ideas. He was contributing to important conversations about politics and culture and history. By most external measures, Carter was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. He was following the path that his family background and his education had prepared him for. He was becoming the kind of person his father, if his father had lived, probably would have hoped he would become. But nobody can see inside someone else's mind. Nobody can see the thoughts that run through their head at night. Nobody can measure pain the way they measure intelligence or accomplishment. By the summer of 1988, 10 years after his father's death, Carter was struggling in ways that weren't visible to the people around him. He was seeing a therapist. He had been seeing a therapist for about a month. He was dealing with depression, though the exact nature and severity of what he was experiencing wasn't fully understood, even by those closest to him. Gloria would later speculate that a medication Carter had been prescribed, salbutamol, an asthma medication, might have triggered a psychotic episode. There is actually medical literature about this medication causing psychiatric disturbances as a side effect. Some people who take it experience mood changes, anxiety, even psychotic episodes. Gloria clung to this explanation for years, needing to believe there was a medical reason, something that could explain the inexplicable. But the truth is more complicated. Depression is complicated. Mental health crises rarely have a single cause. What we know is that Carter was in pain, real pain, the kind of psychological pain that no amount of money or privilege can fix, the kind of pain that doesn't announce itself clearly, the kind of pain that people sometimes hide remarkably well. On July 22nd, 1988, Carter was at his mother's penthouse apartment. His brother Anderson was away, pursuing his own life and career. It was just Carter and Gloria. According to Gloria's account, which she shared years later in her memoir and in interviews with her surviving son, Carter had been sleeping. He woke up in what she described as a dazed state. Something was wrong. He didn't seem fully present. He didn't seem fully conscious, even though his eyes were open. He came into the room where Gloria was, and she immediately noticed that something was off. He was disoriented, not quite himself. And then he went out onto the terrace. Gloria followed him, growing increasingly alarmed as she watched her son's behavior. She watched him approach the terrace wall, a low stone wall that was designed to be decorative, not really a barrier. She watched him climb up onto it. He was sitting on the wall, 1 foot on the wall, 1 foot hanging over the edge, 14 stories up. His body was balanced in a way that suggested he was thinking about jumping, or he was already in the process of doing so. Gloria began to beg him. Not gently. She screamed. She pleaded. She told him everything she could think of to make him want to stay alive. She told him about his brother Anderson. She told him that people loved him. She told him that life could be different. That help was available. That he didn't have to do this. Carter, come back. Carter, come back. She kept saying it, over and over. She was trying every angle. She was trying to reach some part of her son that might still want to live. For a moment, and this is the detail that haunted Gloria for the rest of her life, for a moment, she thought he was going to listen. For a brief moment, there was hope. There was the possibility that he might swing his legs back over the wall, that they might walk back inside together, that they might call an ambulance or a doctor, or do something to address this moment. There was a possibility that this ended differently. But then he didn't listen. According to Gloria, he jumped like an athlete. He pulled his legs over the wall and jumped, voluntarily, deliberately. He let go. Carter Vanderbilt Cooper fell from the 14th floor of his mother's penthouse on July 22nd, 1988. He fell past the 13th floor. He fell past the 12th floor. He fell past all the levels of this building that represented wealth and privilege and access. He fell 140 feet. He fell to the street below. And when he landed, the people who would find him would see a young man in expensive clothes who was no longer alive, who would never think again, who would never dream again, who would never experience another moment of anything. 23 years old. Gloria stayed on the terrace. She didn't jump after him, although years later she said that she thought about it. Years later, she said that for a moment she considered ending her own life as well. But then she remembered Anderson. She thought about her surviving son. She thought about what would happen to Anderson if he lost both his father and his mother. And she decided to stay alive. She called emergency services. She gave them the information. She told them what had happened. And then she waited. The police arrived. The detectives arrived. The investigation was straightforward from a procedural standpoint. There were no signs of foul play. There was no indication that anyone else was involved. It was clearly a case of suicide. The medical examiner would confirm this. Gloria's account was the account of a mother who had watched her son jump. She had been there. She had seen it. The case was clear. Carter Vanderbilt Cooper died by suicide on July 22nd, 1988. He was 23 years old. He had a Princeton education. He had a family that loved him. He had a career that was just beginning. He had every advantage, every opportunity, every reason to believe that his life could improve. And he chose death instead. Anderson Cooper was 21 years old when he got the phone call. He wasn't there when it happened. He didn't watch his brother fall. He didn't hear his mother scream. He didn't see the police or the ambulances or the body. He just got a phone call. A voice telling him that his brother was dead. That Carter had jumped from a building. That it was suicide. Later, in interviews decades later, Anderson would describe how that moment fractured his life. Before that phone call, he had one identity. After that phone call, he had a different identity. He was the surviving brother. He was the one whose twin, not biological twin, but psychological twin, his family member closest to him, had chosen death. Anderson said, "I think about my brother. I think about his death every single day. Every single day. Not just often, not sometimes. Every day. 30 years later, and I still think about him every single day." That's what losing a sibling to suicide means. It means that for 3 decades, every single day has included a thought about that person, about why they did it, about what you could have done differently, about whether there was something you missed. For Gloria, the trauma was even more visceral. She didn't just learn that her son was dead. She watched him die. She watched him make the choice. She heard him leave. She tried to stop him and failed. She would later write, "I wanted to die in the aftermath. The only thing keeping me alive was going over the pain again and again, trying to understand, trying to find the moment where I could have done something differently." For weeks, Gloria stayed in bed. She couldn't function. She couldn't eat. She couldn't think about anything except that moment on the terrace. Her friends came and went. Carter's friends visited, and Gloria would look into their eyes with what Anderson described as wild desperation, searching for answers. Did they know something? Had Carter said something to them? Was there an explanation that could make sense of this? But no one had answers. And so Gloria had to learn how to survive something that felt unsurvivable. Anderson Cooper, in the years after his brother's death, made a choice that shocked everyone who knew him. Instead of settling into a comfortable life in Manhattan, instead of using his family name and connections to get a prestigious job at a major news network, Anderson did something radical. He became obsessed with places where people were dying. He went to Somalia in 1992 during the famine, sneaking in with a camera to document starvation and death. He went to Bosnia. He went to Rwanda. He put himself in situations where survival wasn't guaranteed, where death was immediate and visible and undeniable. Later, Anderson recognized what he was doing. He said, "I spent years wondering if I too would end up suffering from depression like my brother. Would I inherit that darkness? Was I safe? Or was the same fate waiting for me?" He was testing himself. He needed to know if he could survive. And he needed to be around people who were facing real survival challenges because he couldn't tolerate the artificiality of normal society. He couldn't attend dinner parties and talk about trivial things when he knew how quickly everything could fall apart. He was trying to understand why his brother couldn't survive, by learning how other people managed to survive in the worst conditions imaginable. In 2022, decades after his brother's death, Anderson Cooper launched a podcast called All There Is. The entire focus of the podcast is grief and loss. He interviews people who have experienced profound losses. He talks openly about his brother's suicide. He talks about how the loss has shaped his entire life. He's trying to make meaning out of tragedy by helping other people understand that they're not alone in their grief. He still doesn't have all the answers. He still thinks about Carter every single day. But he's transformed his brother's death into a life focused on understanding human resilience and pain. And what he's discovered is something profound, that almost everyone has experienced loss. that almost everyone is carrying grief, that we're all connected by our shared experience of losing people we love. Carter Vanderbilt Cooper lived 23 years. He was intelligent. He was kind. He was part of an extraordinary family, and his life mattered not because of his last name, but because he was a person, because he was seen and loved by the people who knew him. If you're watching this and you're struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts, please reach out to a friend, to a family member, to a therapist, to a crisis line. And if you know someone who's struggling, please pay attention. Please ask the hard questions. Please be present. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. And be kind to the people around you. You never know what they're carrying.